All right. Shall we get started?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. Great. All right. Well, I think everyone can see me. Welcome everyone tonight to our last in our series of 4 train station talks, normally for the Sauerland Conservancy. Normally we're at the train station, but we've been able to do these fabulous talks on Zoom, and tonight our topic is silviculture and forest management. I'm Beverly Mills. I'm a trustee of the Sauerland Conservancy, and I'd like to welcome all of you to this presentation. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. Our meeting technical host, Karina from the Sauerland Conservancy staff, will have the audio of all of the participants muted while we listen so that we can't hear everyone else's dogs barking or people coming in and out of the rooms where we're sitting. That will ensure that there won't be any distractions, but you're all free to turn off and on your own video. Our speaker will be presenting slides and materials for about an hour. After that, we'll have a brief question and answer period. If you'd like to ask a question, feel free to type it into the chat bar. At the bottom of your screen, there's an icon that says chat, and it will open up. You click that, it will open up, type a question, put your name. And when this is over, we will call on you. Everyone will be unmuted, and we'll have a chance to ask some questions and chat together. Or just at that time, just wave your hand and we'll see you, and you'll be able to ask your question verbally. This talk is being recorded so that we may offer it to others on our website. So please go ahead and welcome it to your friends. Also on our call tonight is our Executive Director of the Sauerland Conservancy, Lori Cleveland, and she'll be helping direct some questions and answers at the end as well. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Our speaker tonight is Courtney Compton. As young as she looks, she is an assistant regional forester with the State Lands Management Program of the New Jersey Forest Service. She graduated from Stockton University in 2011 with a bachelor's degree in environmental science and continued her education at SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry and completed her master's of forestry degree in forest management and operations in 2014. Courtney began her career with the New Jersey Forest Service in 2011 as a volunteer, where she quickly became a part-time forestry assistant until being hired full-time as a forester in 2016. During her time as a forestry assistant, she also consulted as a forester with Shelterwood Forest Managers and Mercer County Soil Conservation District. She's also taught as an adjunct professor at Stockton University, teaching forest measuring. So now I would like to turn the microphone over to Courtney, and her presentation is on your screen. Thank you.
All right, thanks Beverly, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I'd much rather see you in person, but due to the circumstances, this is what we're working with. So I'm glad to be here, and with that, we'll start the presentation. So tonight I'm going to talk to you, like Beverly said, about silviculture and forest management, and then how you can help your woods. All right, so one of the first things we're going to talk about right off the bat is what is silviculture? So silviculture is the art and science of controlling the establishment, growth, composition, health, and quality of forests and woodlands to meet the diverse needs and values of landowners and society on a sustainable basis. So it's the art and science of controlling establishment, growth, composition, health, and quality to meet needs and values of landowners and society, especially on a sustainable basis. So for the most part, right, this includes science-based knowledge and also practical judgment. So knowing how trees interact with the environment and seeing those practical interactions and applications. So the next thing we're going to talk about is what is forest management. So forest management is the practical application of basically silviculture. So of these biological, physical, quantitative, managerial, economic, social, and policy principles to the regeneration, management, utilization, and conservation of forests to meet certain goals and objectives. Now, these goals and objectives can include all of these things, including aesthetics, right? Creating fish habitat, recreation, urban values, because we're not talking about just the traditional rural forest, we're talking about urban forests as well. They can include objectives for water quality and quantity, and also wildlife habitat, wood products, and even threatened and endangered plant species and things like that. So the practical application of biological, physical, quantitative, managerial, economic, social, and policy principles to meet certain goals and objectives for a variety of different reasons. So since we're talking about forest management and silviculture, I want to bring scale into things. So a lot of you may have joined in on some of our talks previously with the Forest Service about the State Forest Action Plan. So this is basically a landscape scale plan with strategies on how to do forest management across the state. So first we're talking about, right, the bigger picture, the landscape, ecosystem management. So how we can do good management across the state of New Jersey. And then we want to look a level down, right? So we look at forest management, okay? So this could be a region like the Sourlands. This could be the Pinelands, Highlands, or even a specific state forest or park. And then as we kind of move down the scale, we look on a smaller level at the stand, and that's where silviculture comes into play. So this practical application of management on a stand level. Now, it's very important to look at the different ecologic and economic factors, always at least one level beyond the scale of immediate interest. So the scale of where you're managing. So if you're working on a stand, say it's your backyard or your woodlot, you always want to think about, okay, well, how is the management that I'm going to do in this location going to affect the forest or maybe the region on a different scale? So it's always very important to think about, you know, one scale beyond where you're working. All right, so we're going to talk about a couple of more very important forestry words that we tend to use a lot. The one I just used a minute ago was stand. So stand is a contiguous group of trees sufficiently uniform in age class distribution, composition, and structure, growing on a site of uniform quality to form a distinguishable unit. All right, so basically a collection of trees uniform in their composition to form a distinguishable unit. Now I want to point out this image in the lower left corner here. So you can see each of these polygons here would be considered a separate stand, right? So these, the red and yellow polygons, they look like they might be a bit different species. This yellow one here, the trees in there look taller compared to some of the other ones. So you can see how they would form a distinguishable unit. They might be different ages also. So that's what a stand is. Another thing we use a lot is the word snag. So snag is basically just a standing dead tree. And this is very important to take note in a lot of the stands that we're working in for wildlife habitat, and also knowing how much down woody debris or down woody material we might have in a stand, which is also very good wildlife habitat. So that's a word we use a lot as well. The next thing I want to talk about is different silvicultural systems. So we have even-aged silvicultural systems, and a lot of forestry words, thankfully, are pretty self-explanatory. So even-aged system is just like how it sounds. It's a stand composed of a single age class of trees in which the age range is usually plus or minus 20 years. So it's not really a big range in age. They're relatively similar age range. And you can see in the bottom corner of this graphic here, this is typically what an even-aged forest would look like, right? All the trees at relatively the same height, little differentiation, but for the most part, pretty similar. So the next system we'll talk about is the uneven-aged silvicultural system. And again, it's kind of self-explanatory. So we have a series of uneven-aged trees in the same stand, usually 3 or more age classes. They can be all mixed together throughout the stand, or sometimes it can be small groups throughout the stand. Okay, and this is one to be careful of because a lot of different forests or stands may have this type of structure, but they might not necessarily be uneven aged. And the reason for this is species act a little differently, right? So some are very shade tolerant species, right? They can handle a lot of shade, grow in shade for a long period of time. And other species are shade intolerant. So they're not very capable of growing in the shade of other trees. So you have to be careful. Sometimes you'll see the same type of structure just because you have a different species composition, but they won't necessarily be different ages. The last system that we're going to talk about is the 2-age system. And again, pretty self-explanatory, right? You have 2 different age classes within a stand, pretty distinct. And again, usually one age class is going to be kind of plus or minus 20 years. So they'll be within that same age range. And again, you can see in the top right corner of this graphic here, what a 2-age stand looks like. So you might have something like a shade intolerant overstory and maybe more shade tolerant species in the understory, or it could be just a younger generation of the trees in the canopy. For some reason, a disturbance or some type of thing might have caused that. All right. So moving along, another very, very important forestry word that we use is density. So density is a measure of the degree of crowding of trees within a certain area. So we generally express density as far as growing space ratios, okay? And growing space is a very important concept to think of as we go through this presentation a little more. So some of the ways that we express density is by spacing between trees, the number of trees in an area, so trees per acre. We also use a measurement called basal area per acre. And I'm not going to get into the weeds here, but basically it takes into account the cross-sectional area of the trees represented across that space. So that's one way we look at density as well. And we can also use volume per unit area to express density. So I just wanted to give you all a visual here as to how we can talk about density a little differently. So if you look at this graphic on the left, right, we have some widely spaced pine trees here. They look kind of larger in diameter, right? And there's a lot of available growing space on that site. There's not a lot of competition between trees. They're nicely spaced out. So that would be a lower density site, right? We would have less trees per acre. Oh, sorry about that. And then we see the graphic on the right here. It looks a lot more crowded, right? So this would be a higher density stand. There's less spacing between trees, so they're closer together. They also might have a little smaller diameter, and we would have a lot more trees per acre on that site than we would on the picture on the left. So this site here would be a lower density site, and this would be a higher density site here. So you can kind of see some of those differences there. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is succession. So succession is the gradual replacement of one community of plants by another. Sometimes it can start as primary succession, so you're starting from bare ground from scratch. Other times it could be because of some kind of disturbance in the forest, so it might trigger this process of succession. So you can see a lot of times, especially with primary succession, you'll start with things like mosses or lichen, and then you'll get a lot of the herbaceous community, so like weeds, grasses, and then those will slowly be replaced by shrubs. And then some of what we call pioneer species of trees and things like that. Over time, these get replaced by another community. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But first, I want to talk about, well, how do trees grow? And this might seem silly, but sometimes it's a concept that people don't really realize. So trees grow from the top up and from the outside out. And I like this picture on the left here. It does a pretty good job of explaining kind of how trees grow. So in all plants, you'll see they start from the shoots, the tips of the shoots here where the leaves start to grow, right? There's always some very top shoot, usually called apical meristem, right? So the trees grow from that point upwards. And then here you can see some of these tissues within the stem of the plant or the tree. And lateral means to go out, right? So you can tell that's where the tree would grow out, right? And same thing for the roots. They have apical tips here. They'll go from the tips of the roots out. So I also like this graphic here on the right because it explains it a little bit how trees grow more as you look at the tree rings. So as you might know, each ring on a tree stump, if you look inside the tree, is a year's growth. So you can see how that's kind of represented in this picture on the right here, because you can see each ring, how it grows up, and then where it grows out as well. So it's a really good thing to remember. All right, so another good thing to remember, right, is different species of trees grow a lot differently, and they have different lifespans as well. So kind of from that succession talk we were having a minute ago, right, we have pioneer species. So a lot of these species are usually the first to colonize a site, especially when there's some type of disturbance or bare ground. So especially in the sourlands area, you might have things like tulip poplar, ash, right? Different species of cherry, maybe pin cherry, different species of birch. So a lot of these have seeds that are very easy to disperse either through wind or by wildlife. And they'll be one of the first things to colonize a site, but they won't necessarily have a very long lifespan. And that's where you get more hardier species of trees that begin to come in, and refer to those as more climax species. So a lot of these species of trees put a lot of growth towards good seed, and they have more dense wood and that type of thing. So we can think of oaks and hickories and beech and sugar maple as well, because some of these species that start to come in next also are usually a little more shade tolerant. So they'll grow in gaps and things like that. So one example you all might be familiar with, right? Especially old abandoned farmlands and things like that. When you see Eastern red cedar is a good pioneer species. So a lot of times you'll see those colonizing old fields and that type of thing. So that's an example of Eastern red cedar there, pioneer species. And then more of a climax species, like I said, usually tends to be like American beech or sugar maple, right? More shade tolerant species. So that's what you might see in a climax forest. All right, so before you think about any kind of silviculture or forest management, right, one of the most important things is to gather as much information as you can. So one of the important things, right, is to understand the history of a site. And I thought this was a really cool picture. I actually found this from the Hopewell History Project, very interesting. And it's an old homestead, and it says the caption at the bottom, right, farmer and dealer in hard lumber. So that right there tells you a lot about the site, all right? So, right, it started as farmland. You might have some legacy trees that were left from around the farm or the homestead. And it says they're a dealer in hard lumber. So one thing you can imagine is that the history of the site, hard lumber, there was probably a lot of hardwood trees around that they harvested. So history is a very important thing to know. It tells you a lot about a site. Another important thing is to understand what kind of soil you have on a site that you're looking at or where your stand is, right? There's in urban forestry, we always say, plant the right tree in the right place. Well, in order to do that, you need to know what kind of trees do best in what kind of soils. So different trees might grow differently in sandy soils that are well drained or soils that have more clay or are poorly drained. So that's a very important thing to pay attention to. Understanding what species you have on your site is very important as well. And knowing the age of those species, again, that might tell you what kind of treatments you might need to do in your forest or on your stand, in your woods. And one good way to do that, right, is to count the tree rings. That gives you a very good idea of age. And we as foresters have these really cool tools that are called increment borers. They allow us to tell the age of the tree without having to cut it down, because we don't always want to cut all the trees we see. So it's very cool. It's kind of like a little drill bit. We screw it into the tree, and then we have this little thing. We can extract just this small little core, and then we can count the rings on that little core that came from the tree to get an idea of age. Disturbance history and of an area is also a very good thing to know, right? Are there frequent hurricanes? Do we get a lot of ice storms like New England? Do we have issues with invasives and that type of stuff? So very good to know about your area, disturbances. Also, how many trees do we have in an area, right? We talked about density. So knowing how many trees per acre you have across your site might give you a hint to a lot of things that you might be able to do management-wise to create a healthier forest. And how big are these trees, right? That's also going to play a role in some of the types of things that you might do. All right, so one of the very first silvicultural methods we're going to talk about is regeneration, regenerating stands. So as foresters, we always like to work smarter, not harder, even though we got to work hard a lot of times. But we like to work with natural regeneration, right? It's better for a site. Those trees are adapted to that area, to that climate, the microsite. So we always like to have natural regeneration across the site. But sometimes that's not always feasible. Sometimes areas need a little bit of help. So we also use artificial or planting as a regeneration method, right? So this tool in this picture that we have here is called a dibble bar, and it allows us to make a hole in the ground. You just stick it in the ground, wiggle it back and forth. You pop a tree in there, and then you put it in behind the hole, and you push the soil over to get that seedling nice and snug in there. So that's one of the tools we use for regeneration. Another method that we use for regeneration is called coppice. So this is a form of cutting that you use for specific species that regenerate by stump sprouts or root suckers, that type of thing. So the species that you see in this picture below right here, that's aspen. You might be a little familiar with that in the Sourlands area. Might have a little bit of that around. And that's one species that particularly does the best regeneration through coppice cutting. It doesn't spread very well through seed. So that's one of the best ways to be able to regenerate that species. So what kind of tools do we use to regenerate, to use the regeneration method? Well, like you saw, we use things like the dibble bar. We have planting bags that we can use, like in this picture here. We also use tools called site preparation tools. And a lot of these things help, like it sounds, prep the site to make it more conducive for the seedlings to grow. So one of the things that we can use is disking. So it's kind of like pulling a plow across the ground, right? It breaks apart the root mat that we have, right? It could be pretty dense with roots, heavy. It's kind of hard for seedlings to start to grow through that, for seeds to grow through that. Another tool that we use is called drum trapping. So it's basically this big steel drum that gets filled with water, and it gets pulled by something like a bulldozer or the like. And it basically kind of, again, pulls apart that root mat and makes nice mineral soil available. And that those are all forms of what we call scarification. So basically breaking up the root mat, that herbaceous layer, making it more available for seedlings to be able to grow through the soil. We also use prescribed burning. So I'm from Southern New Jersey, and that's very common in this part of the state, but it's also used in Northern New Jersey as well. And it's becoming more widely used also. It's a very useful tool. Sometimes you can't use it in more populated areas, but right tool, right place. So that makes a very nice seed bed, and a lot of the ash, the nutrients and things in the ash makes it very helpful for new seedlings to be able to grow. We also sometimes have to use herbicide for competition control. So that's a good site preparation tool, right? In the Sourlands area, something you guys might have to deal with a lot, or a little bit further northern New Jersey, is a lot of invasive species. So how do we prevent these from outcompeting a lot of the trees that we have? Well, one tool we can use is herbicide. And we were talking about this a little bit earlier before everybody joined, but fencing. Fencing is a very good tool, especially when you have a lot of deer pressure or deer browsing issues. So that's a regeneration tool that we use as well. So just to give you an idea, this is a little disking plow that we used on a site in Southern New Jersey. Just gets attached to a UTV. And you can see in the main part of this picture, right, you see that nice mineral soil, the root mat being broken up as opposed to the herbaceous material over here. So that'll be a lot easier for an oak seedling to start to grow through. Again, an example of prescribed burning. And a lot of times prescribed burning just takes that surface layer of fuels, that herbaceous plant growth, and it'll burn that up, and that's usually the most it'll do. And just an example of the different types of equipment we use for herbicide. So you might have a larger tank and something like a UTV or a backpack sprayer that somebody will walk around with. We also use aerial application on certain sites when we have to do widespread areas. So one of the types of restoration projects we use this a lot for is Atlantic white cedar in Southern New Jersey. So we'll do an application of herbicide that is very selective just for hardwood trees only, and it doesn't do anything to evergreen species of trees. So Atlantic white cedar is an evergreen species. So we can spray it over top of those species, and it'll just take out those outcompeting hardwoods, and it won't do anything to the cedar. And then again, fencing, right, to exclude deer. So this is a typical type of fence we'll put up. This one in particular was in Stoke State Forest for a hemlock restoration project we were doing to keep deer from eating the hemlock seedlings that we were trying to regenerate. This is just basically PVC coated chicken wire. So that's one of the types of things we use, but you can also use plastic fencing and things like that. All right, so the next silvicultural method we're going to talk about is tending. And remember we were talking about growing space. So with regeneration silvicultural methods, our growing space is primarily concentrated on that young generation of trees, that regeneration. So for tending, our growing space is concentrated on the trees that are already present within the site. So we're concentrated growing space on those trees. So one tending method that we can use early on when trees are in the seedling stage is called weeding. This is generally used when you have a lot of herbaceous plants and things like that, grasses, and the trees are competing, pretty heavily with them. So they might be having an issues growing up above that layer. So one thing we can use is spot treatment of herbicide, right? Just to knock back those grasses enough to give the trees a little better chance to grow up above that layer so they don't have as much competition. Another tending method that we use is called cleaning. So this is generally done, we're out of the seedling stage, we're in something called sapling stage. So probably trees with a diameter, probably less than 4 inches. And for the most part, this tending method, you're looking to favor species and quality of trees. So this graphic, you can see what it would look like before we started the treatment, right? You might have a different species of tree overtopping the other species that might be more desirable, whether for wildlife or products, that type of thing. And the quality of the trees that are overtopping the smaller ones might not be very good, right? They might not be quite as healthy. They might be kind of scraggly. So basically you would just take out those trees that are out competing the species that you might want to favor. And it would look something like this after you did it. So that's a nice graphic there. The next tending treatment we're going to talk about is liberation. So it's kind of similar, but for the most part, you're trying to free the species from older and poorer competition. So a lot of times, this treatment is used to restore a lot of poor past logging practices. So you might have had somebody come in and log off all the really good trees that are good species, good quality, healthy trees, and just leave a lot of the poorer quality trees behind, the ones that they couldn't use for products and things like that. So a lot of times this is a good way to restore a site because you might get rid of those poorer quality trees that are providing seed for that site. They might not necessarily be providing healthier seeds for tree growth. All right, so you would basically cut out those larger trees that are overtopping the new generation. And on the bottom here, this is about what it would look like. So those younger trees that were older, under that older, poorer competing layer would be able to be free to grow. All right, so the next tending methods we're going to talk about, these are generally when trees are a little bit older. And for the most part, we're going to talk about thinning here. So there's a couple of different types of thinning we can use. One we use is called thinning from below, or low thinning. And this picture does a very good job here of explaining some of the different intensities of low thinning also. So this one's pretty nice, pretty easy to remember, right? Thinning from below or low. So basically you're taking the shortest or smallest trees that are in the stand and you're removing those to free up some of the resources on the site. And a lot of times this is done in silvicultural systems that are even aged, right? So all of these trees might be the same age, but they might not have, they might have outcompeted each other. So generally the ones that are shorter and smaller are just the poorer quality trees out of that same age class. So you can see in the graphic here, right, you would just start with the shortest and smallest trees, free up some of that growing space that we were talking about. And then depending on intensity, you might go to a little bit taller trees, a little bit larger trees, all right? So you can see some of the differences in intensity here. Okay, so the next one we're going to talk about is thinning from above, or crown thinning. And this is just a nice example here that I pulled up of what thinning from below can look like. So this is kind of a moderate intensity thinning from below. And that was to favor shortleaf pine species in one of our southern New Jersey sites. Okay, so thinning from above, or crown thinning, basically concentrates the growing space on the healthier, more dominant species within a site. So these letters on here, D, C, D, I, they just mean dominant, codominant, intermediate trees, okay? So this has a lot to do with the size of the crowns and where they are located in the canopy. So the more dominant the tree, the higher in the canopy it's going to be. Typically the healthier the tree, right? It beat out all of its buddies in competition to grow up higher first. So thinning from above, the goal is basically to release those better quality, more dominant trees that are in the overstory. So you can see here, this is what it would look like unthinned. And then this is what it would look like with a thinning from above, or crown thinning. So you're basically concentrating the growing space on those healthier upper canopy species. All right, so the next thing, pretty similar, it's called free thinning, but this solely concentrates on the desired trees that you want to leave behind. So these could be anything from a desired species, right? Maybe you're trying to make a stand more conducive to certain wildlife. Maybe you want to keep more oaks, more hickories, beech, that kind of thing. So this specifically concentrates on what's called crop trees and trying to release those trees, again, from competing trees for the same resources on the site. Okay, so we start with this, this image in the top left here. So that would be the unthinned stand. And then you can see in this one here, right, these are the trees with the hash marks that would be marked to be taken out. This is what the treatment would look like with those trees removed. And you can see these are the crop trees here. So those are the ones we're concentrating on trying to release from competition. Okay, and this is what the stand would look like afterwards. So those crop trees are free to grow. They have more water resources, more nutrients, a little more sunlight on each of the sides of the crown. And one of the other tending treatments that we use also is forest stand improvement. But this we incorporate a lot with all of our treatments. So you're always trying to improve the stand, whether it's the health, the type of species you're looking for, the quality, that kind of thing. So forest stand improvement focuses on improving the health and quality of the stand. All right, so I just want to show you all just a few examples of some of these different treatments. So this one here in particular was done in southern New Jersey, and the goals and objectives here were to reduce fuels. This area was located adjacent to a senior living community. So you can imagine if there was a wildfire issue there, that would be a big problem. So what we call ladder fuels are basically fuels that connect the ground to the crowns of trees. So if a wildfire came through, it would just go right up the ladder into the crowns of the trees, and then you would have a crown fire. So the goal of this was a thinning from low and from below. Again, one of those thinning from below. And it was basically to take out those short and small diameter trees that would cause a wildfire to go into the canopy. So you can see what the ladder fuels look like in this picture in the top left. And then this is what the site looked like after we did the thinning treatment on the bottom right. So you can see we don't really have that mid-story of trees, and there's not that connection through the canopy. All right, so this picture here is another site we did in southern New Jersey. Sorry, I have a lot of southern New Jersey pictures. But this was another thinning from below, just a little bit different intensity. So this would be a little higher intensity. And you can see, again, this was done for fuel reduction and to remove those ladder fuels so we don't have a lot of wildfire issues, right? And you can see that kind of mid-story and those ladder fuels are missing from that stand. All right, so the last silvicultural methods we're going to talk about are harvest and reproduction, okay? And we're going to start with typical treatments that you would use for an uneven age silvicultural system. And we'll go from lower intensity to higher intensity. So the first one we're going to talk about is single tree selection. And all of these are, again, harvest and reproduction methods, okay? So I like this graphic here because it shows, right, what the starting stand would look like in the top here, and then what some of the treatments look like, and then what it would look like afterwards. So with single tree selection, it's just how it sounds. You would remove single trees here and there across the stand, basically to release some of the trees underneath. And generally these are very shade tolerant trees, right? Because moving one tree here and there isn't really going to open the canopy a lot to bring a lot more sunlight in, just a little bit. All right, so that's one of the lower intensity reproduction treatments. So the next one we're going to talk about is group selection. And this basically, like it sounds, it focuses on group of trees. So you might want to release a certain group of trees, right? Make it more conducive for them to grow by removing a certain group. Okay, so that's what this would look like in the center of this picture here. So you would take out that group of trees and release these ones underneath here. And that might encourage more shade intolerant species, so like mid-tolerant species, things like birch and that type of thing. Whereas a patch cut focuses primarily on an area. So a patch cut, basically, you're going to cut everything in a certain area. So you could have something that's 1/10 of an acre patch or 1/2 of an acre patch, or maybe a 1 or 2 acre patch, depending on what your goals are. So it could be wildlife goals. It could be to create more vertical structure or horizontal structure in a stand, right? So the larger the patch, in the center, you're going to have a lot more shade intolerant species. So you might have things like ash or tulip popper or cherries. And as you move outward to the edges of that patch, where you have more of the surrounding stand, you'll have more shade tolerant species. So right on the edge of the stand, you would have probably the most shade tolerant species right here, because they're getting the shadows from the other trees. All right, and this is what these treatments would all look like after you did them. So the patch cut, you can see you regenerate a couple of different types of species, and the group, you just have basically that one that was present at the time that you cut. And this is just an example of what a patch cut would look like right here. So you can see that was just a small opening. We cut everything in that opening. And this is actually a demo area that we did at our Forest Resource Education Center, just to show the different regeneration or reproduction methods. All right, so the next silvicultural methods we're going to talk about for harvest and reproduction are even-aged silvicultural system. So these would, like I said, primarily be used in even-age systems. So the first one we're going to talk about, usually the lower intensity, is called a Shelterwood treatment. So in this treatment, you can see at the top of the image here, basically you leave the main canopy, the trees, spaced probably about 30 feet or so apart, right? They're not too far, but they're also not as dense as the previous stand might have been. And the goal of this is to basically regenerate species that are kind of mid-tolerant. So they still need a little bit of shading to be protected from too much sunlight, or maybe competing species that are more shade intolerant. All right, so that's what that would look like. And then the next one we have here is a seed tree reproduction method. So in this one here, most of the time what you're leaving behind, the trees that you're leaving, are very farly spaced apart. So you're allowing a lot of sunlight to reach the ground in that stand. And this is for more shade intolerant species. And those trees that you're leaving behind, those seed trees as we call them, they're the parent trees for the next generation. So that's your seed source right there, if you don't have enough in the ground in the seed bank. And then as we move to higher intensity treatment, so the highest intensity we have is the clear cut. And this method is specifically used for regenerating shade intolerant species. So species that need full sunlight, no competition, all the growing space they can get. So that's what a clear cut would look like, just cutting all the vegetation on that site. And I just want to reiterate that this is not land clearing. So land clearing is typically done, right, to develop a site or something like that, build something. Clear cutting is a silvicultural method. So its end goals and objectives are explicitly to regenerate another generation of trees. So that's always the end goal in mind. So land clearing, although it might look similar, it has a lot more different goals and objectives in mind. All right, so I just want to show you all a couple of images of what some of these treatments look like. So actually, when I was talking to Lori last week, this is the site we were out working on. We were cutting some trees in this area. This is an oak shelterwood in southern New Jersey. So we have some species of oak and shortleaf pine in here, and we're specifically trying to regenerate oak species. So oak is usually kind of a mid-tolerant species. And you can see we opened up enough space in this site as compared to the surrounding areas, but it's still not really open, right? There's some shading, so it's gonna help some of the competition with species such as pitch pine, which do really well with full sunlight. So that's what a shelterwood treatment might look like. This here is also a southern New Jersey treatment. This was an old nursery site, an old plantation site that we have southern pine beetle issues with. So this site was actually to regenerate species of loblolly pine. And it's a very shade intolerant species, so it needs a lot of sunlight, but we wanted to make sure that we had all the seed source we did. So you can see the seed trees that are present here in the background. And again, these are widely spaced trees trying to get the most amount of sunlight to the site that you can for the most part. And this here is what a clear cut would look like. So again, this is a species in southern New Jersey, Atlantic white cedar, that explicitly regenerates all at the same time, all at once, but needs full sunlight to be able to grow at its best. So this is what a clear cut might look like. All right, so to do tending and harvesting, what types of tools we use? Well, we use everything from hand tools, so chainsaws or brush saws, that type of thing, to very sophisticated machinery like you see in the bottom right here. That's called a forestry mower. And we also use best management practices as a tool to get these harvesting methods completed without any irreversible adverse impacts to a site. So this right here is a piece of machinery that's used to harvest a site. This is called a harvester or a feller buncher. It has this large boom on it, so it has the ability to reach in the forest, and it doesn't have to traverse across the site as much, so that we don't have any more adverse impacts, little rutting and that type of thing. And actually the wide tracks that are on this machine actually displace the weight much better than even if somebody were to walk through the forest. So very low ground pressure equipment. This machine here is called a forwarder. So this basically has a small loading arm on the back to be able to pick up logs and place it on the rack here. And again, you can see the large wide tires displaces the weight of the machine, so it has very little ground pressure growing across the site. And these machines are useful for taking the material off of a site so that it can take the logs to an area where a truck may be able to pick them up, so that you don't have trucks and things like that going across the site. All right, so this piece of equipment here is called a skidder. You might be a little bit more familiar. I think these are generally more used in the northern part of the state. So basically this would be used to drag logs and things across the site when you're harvesting material. But the major thing that I want to point out in this picture is what's called a skidder bridge or crane mats. So these little wooden bridges, which are temporary, are laid across the stream. So this is a best management tool that we use. So we don't have any sediment or soil particles entering the stream and changing the quality of the stream. And so we also don't have any erosion issues along the edges of the streams. So this is a best management practice that we use. Another best management practice tool that we use for harvesting and tending is called water bars. And a lot of you might be familiar with these, just have never realized what they were. So a lot of times you'll see these on trails, especially in areas that have large slopes and things like that. So it's basically a tool used to reduce effects of erosion So water traveling down a slope is going to pick up speed, while these little earthen mounds slow the water down. They redirect it off of the straight path that they have, and reduces any erosion effects that you might have. So this could be, again, a trail, a skidder path, that type of thing. And a lot of times you can use branches and material that wasn't harvested on the site to put on the edges to also slow the speed of the water coming off the edge of that. All right, so now that we talked about all these different silvicultural methods, right? Well, sometimes we have to use a combination of these, and it could be for restoration from things like wildfire. So in this picture here, this was actually a cedar site that was impacted by wildfire. And we can also use a combination of these for disturbances such as hurricanes and storms. And you'll see some images of this. And again, especially in the Sourlands area where you guys are dealing with a lot of emerald ash borer infestations, right? We can use a combination of these types of methods to help with insect and disease damage for restoration. So this was an area, this was in Hacklebarney State Park, had Hurricane Sandy damage, I'm sorry. And we had a lot of blowdown, large, more mature oak trees and things like that. So we used a combination of a few methods for the stands, especially since there was a lot of invasive species present, and we had issues with deer browse pressure in the area. So what we did at this site, we basically brought a forestry mower in. We mowed a lot of the invasive species down, a lot of the material that was left on the ground, so that we would have more available growing space for new trees to grow into the site. And we also fenced this site, right? So we kept the deer out of there and allowed the trees to get a chance to grow up tall enough. So this stand here was in southern New Jersey. This was also a site that was impacted by Hurricane Sandy. So we had a lot of blowdown damage. You can see these cedar trees were basically like pickup sticks in this stand. And that's actually the image of the same stand that you saw the clear cut example of. So we used a combination of treatments on this site as well to restore it. And as you might know, right, emerald ash borer, we have to be very creative with restoration when we take out a lot of these ash trees. So this was actually along the DNR Canal State Park. We had to do kind of a lot of single tree selection treatments, both for hazard for people and to be able to plant more trees across those sites. And then, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we were doing some hemlock restoration. So we have this little bug called Hemlock woolly adelgid that's been taking out a lot of our eastern hemlock species. So we've been using a combination of these silvicultural methods to try and regenerate and help make some of the hemlock trees that we still currently have much healthier, so we can get a new species come along. So now that we talked about all these different methods, well, how does silviculture look? And I'm going to be honest with you, in the beginning, it does look very ugly. I mean, we can face it. It's okay to say so, right? You have a lot of trees laying around. There's a lot of brush, branches, things like that. But, you know, a lot of other things start this way also. So I'm a very visual person, and I like to think in comparison a lot. So one of the things that I thought about when we're talking about the beginning stages of silviculture is when you go to remodel an area, right? And, you know, I'm a new homeowner, I'm in the same process. I do this a lot. You know, you start work on an area and you got to tear a lot of stuff up and you tear the walls up and, you know, it looks horrible. It really does. But then, you know, you put some work into it, you give it a little bit of time, and it really starts to look better. I mean, you know, your kitchen that you're redoing is really starting to come to shape. It's really starting to look more like a kitchen is supposed to be. Same thing with silviculture. It's a long-term practice. So you just have to give it, time. You have to give it time to recuperate. So we have some pictures here in the top left. This is one of our thinning sites that we worked in. I showed you a picture previously, thinning from below. And you can see, right, with a little bit of time, you're starting to get the understory to grow back, right? These trees are growing into some of the resources that they have there. And then we have this picture in the top right here. So this is the Atlantic white cedar stand that you saw from Hurricane Sandy damage. So this is just a few years later after the clear cut. And you can see a lot of the species is starting to regenerate, right? It doesn't look quite as ugly anymore. You have a lot of nice new trees coming in. And you don't see as much as that dead material that's laying on the ground. So you give it time and you give it a little work until you get the desired result, right? So this is that thinning that we saw, right? You can see the difference here. This is the thinned area. This is the unthinned area. And this is what it looks like, right? There's no more ladder fuels through that forest. You have a lot of the shrub community coming back underneath there. And this is only a year or two after the treatment was done, right? That area you were remodeling, well, it's, wow, you know, it looks great now. It looks amazing. It came so far. And this image on the bottom right here, that isn't the same cedar stand, but this is a stand that had similar restoration activities. And those trees are about 15 to 20 feet tall now. So it just takes a little bit of time. So another thing I wanted to talk about, well, how does silviculture look? Well, it's renewable and it holds carbon, right? So a lot of the forest products that we get from silvicultural methods like tending or harvesting, we get some great products. You know, we get furniture, things like cross-laminated timber, which are being used in a lot more sustainable buildings now. And actually the process to create cross-laminated timber is actually a lot more sustainable and uses less carbon dioxide than creating buildings with concrete and steel materials. And these forest products, they come in a lot of different forms, right? So one thing I wanted to point out here, right? Well, Clorox wipes. We'd be in a pretty big pickle if we didn't have those during these COVID times right now. And that's a forest product, right? That comes from trees. Things like toothpaste, all right, cellulose is used in those. And even things like, and I didn't realize this, materials in LCD screens. So in the screens that you're using to watch this presentation right now, you're using a forest product. So I want to do something a little fun here. And I think Corinne posted the link in the chat here. So we're going to have a little interactive portion here, and hopefully we'll get this to work. It'll be pretty fun. So if you go to the link that's in the chat, it'll bring you up to this this little survey we have here, and it'll show live results. So if you go to that link, well, I want you to choose which item is not a forest product, right? So one of the other ways that you can do this, if you have your phone handy, you can text Courtney Comp, C-O-M-P, 370 to 37607. So if you do that once, it'll allow you to join. Oh, we got some votes already. And then you can choose which one you think is not a forest product. So I'll give you guys a minute or so. We'll see how this works. Give you a little time to log in and play with it. Oh, we're getting a couple of votes here. Oh man. All right. So in case you can't see these images very well, so the first one here, A, we have a little girl with some fabric material there. B, we have some tableware. C looks like a handbag. D, we have a sneaker. And E looks like some pellets, some stove pellets. All right, so we got a handful of votes here. It's not too bad. Oh, we got some for B. All right, so I'll give you guys another minute. I don't want to take too much of your time with this, but I thought it'd be a little more fun since I can see everybody in person here and talk to everybody in person. All right, so it looks like majority is going for the handbag. Well, you guys aren't going to be very happy with me, but this is actually a trick question. So all of these are forest products. So we have fabric here made from cellulose. So rayon is a type of fabric that uses trees. We have B here is wooden silverware, wooden tableware. C, so the handbag, we actually use a lot of graphic papers to make a lot of the textures in things like these handbags and sneakers. And then E, of course, we have wood pellets. So, you know, this time of year, you're keeping your home nice and warm, and thankfully for those forest products. All right, so we'll go back to our presentation here. All right, so now that we know all of these things and we talked about forest products and that type of stuff, well, how can you help your woods? How can you help your forest, your stand, the trees you have in your backyard? Well, one of the best ways that you can start is to talk to a forester, right? This is what we're trained to do. So you can find a forester in New Jersey, and you don't necessarily have to have a forest stewardship plan or be part of a farmland assessment or that type of thing. So we have a link here, and this takes you to a list of approved consulting foresters for New Jersey. And it'll list all of the foresters that we have, the counties that they work in, the types of services that they have, and a lot of the professional organizations that they're a part of. So that's the very, very, very first place you want to start to be able to have a better knowledge and a little bit more support in helping your forest. So the next thing you can do, well, spread what you've learned here in this presentation and learn more. You know, everybody I've always talked to, you're always a student. You're always learning every single day. One of the programs that we have, especially in New Jersey, is a volunteer program. It's called the Woodland Stewards Program. It's usually a three-day overnight stay up in Sussex County, all the way up near High Point. And we teach you a lot of things about how to manage your property and for different things, what different types of wildlife, habitat, and that type of stuff. Another useful tool is the U.S. Forest Service. They actually have a lot of good resources on their site to be able to learn more about forests and how you can help manage them to be healthier. Another one I like to talk about a lot is this hashtag Forest Proud. You can find them online, and it's nice. They have a pretty good social media presence, but they're U.S. Forest Service funded. They have a lot of great information, and it's usually very visual. So they'll have a lot of great pictures. They'll have some video interviews and things like that. So that's a great place to learn things as well. And the most important way you can help your woods, well, go in it. Go visit your woods. Go in your backyard. Take a look around now that you know a little bit more information about how to see things and how to look at things and read the forest. Go to your park down the street, you know, go to your state forest. That's one of the best ways that you can get a really good idea of how to help your forest. How else can you help? Well, you can get involved. You guys are doing that right now, right? You're watching this presentation with the Sourlands Conservancy. You're part of an organization. And another great way is to become a volunteer, right? So with the Division of Parks and Forestry, we actually have a volunteer form that you can fill out. We'll call on our volunteers a lot of times to do different types of projects, from planting to tending sites. And this is a great way to be able to learn, talk to us, understand why we do some of these projects, how it works, how we use the tools, and that kind of thing. And again, one of the most important things you can do, yeah, you can plant a tree. It's very important, but it's very good to know that you need to shepherd that tree or that stand or that woodlot through its life, right? So when you have a child, you don't just say, all right, you know, you can kind of tend to yourself. You can be by yourself. You can handle it. No, we take care of that child, right? We shepherd them. We help them through their life. Well, you need to do the same thing with trees, especially living in an area with 9 million people. That's a lot of people and a lot of things to deal with. So a lot of the disturbances and issues that we have now, trees might not have necessarily had to deal with some time ago. So that's definitely a very, very good thing to keep in mind, right? Maintaining these trees that we have. All right, so with that, I'll be taking any questions, and hopefully you've been furiously throwing some things in the chat there. Again, my name's Courtney Compton. I work for the New Jersey Forest Service, and I have my email contact information there below. So if we don't get to answer your questions tonight, feel free to email me, and I'll definitely help you out.
I have some questions.
Sure.